So after watching SpongeBob The Rise of SquarePants, I began to wonder what will happen to the show now that Nickelodeon is essentially going to milk it for all of its worth. Not that it hadn't been doing it before, but this time in a much more blatant way. Now, it's not exactly news that SpongeBob has been on the decline for at least the past 15 years, so I guess that before we discuss why SpongeBob is now in the place it is, we must figure out what happened to it and why did SpongeBob decline. After I finished watching the new movie, something that I had thought many times in my mind had essentially become true. The SpongeBob we are watching and the SpongeBob we watched all those years ago are not the same. In the original, SpongeBob was naive, but he wasn't exactly dumb, and he knew when enough was enough. In the new show, SpongeBob is a pushover and cries all the time. In the original show, Patrick was not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he had a big heart and cared about his friends. In the new show, Patrick tends to take advantage of his friends and is literally dumber than a bag of rocks. In the original, Squidward's misery was always used for laughs and not used all of the time. In the new show, there are entire episodes devoted to Squidward's misery. In the original, Mr. Krabs was cheap, but he knew when he had gone too far. In the new show, he rarely acknowledges his greed. In the original, Sandy was smart and loved Texas. In the new show, Sandy's only personality trait is being the scientist of the group. So what the hell happened? How did the show went from being so good to being so bad? Okay, maybe that's being a bit unfair. After all, who am I to decide what's objectively bad and what's objectively good? But not for this video. I'm going to try my hardest to be impartial in this subject. In fact, some people seem to actually like seasons 4 through 9. Are they crazy?
No, just ignorant.
Now, recently, SpongeBob has been making a bit of a comeback, and after giving some new episodes a fair chance, I can see that the writers are at least trying to make good episodes now. But make no mistake, there are still some really bad episodes out there. Ink lemonade, anyone? So let's ask why SpongeBob went from being good to being, let's say, average. Well, the reason is pretty obvious. The writers ran out of ideas. I mean, not every show is meant to last over 20 years. You can see that writers began to run out of ideas even before the first movie came out. Many episodes in season 3 began to, well, I don't want to use the term jump the shark because that has a negative connotation. Let's say that they reached a point of creative stagnation. You can see this in many episodes, but one that stands out is the episode I Had an Accident, in which SpongeBob has an accident, and becomes paranoid with going outside, and decides to start practicing social distancing. In an attempt by Sandy and Patrick to get him to come outside, they decide to stage a gorilla attack, but then they get attacked by an actual gorilla, which makes no sense, but the writers clearly knew that, because they seem to be trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink and see what worked. If you take a look at the original writers who worked on the show, many of them left after season 3, because they understandably felt creatively burnt out. That's because SpongeBob is not written like your average show. It doesn't start with a script, it starts with 4 or 5 writers brainstorming ideas, which start on post-it notes but gradually become storyboards, and then an episode is created. So then one must ask, how many ideas can you do with SpongeBob in this way? Well, according to Nickelodeon, you can make over 265 episodes, 13 seasons, 3 films, 3 possible spin-offs, and countless merchandise. How much is enough? Now, you think that animation shouldn't be criticized because it's made for kids? Kids deserve good entertainment too, you filthy casual. So now that we know in which place SpongeBob is right now, time to get into the controversy. Now, unlike most controversies, this one started out before any proper media was shown. Only an announcement was needed in order to outrage the masses. Now, with a big franchise like SpongeBob, you'd think that they would have made countless spin-offs years ago. But there's a reason why that didn't happen. It was because the creator didn't really want any of this. Because he specifically hated the idea of aging down characters, as he wanted SpongeBob to appeal to both kids and adults. In fact, Nickelodeon refused to greenlight the show unless he turned SpongeBob into a kid, but he managed to reach a compromise in which he made him attend boarding school in order to appease the Nickelodeon executives at the time. More on this later. Anyways, in 2019, Nickelodeon announced that they were working on a spin-off set around a young SpongeBob in a summer camp. This announcement was followed by many other announcements for other spin-offs, including one with Patrick and a musical one based on Squidward. One can't help but wonder why all of these announcements came after the unfortunate passing of SpongeBob's creator, as if someone might have been against the idea of spin-offs, but I just can't figure out who. Anyways, things really went south when Paul Tibbitt, who was a writer, director, storyboard artist, showrunner, producer, etc. on SpongeBob, sent out this tweet regarding his thoughts on Camp Coral. Quote, "I do not mean any disrespect to my colleagues who are working on the show. They are good people and talented artists. But this is some greedy, lazy, executive ink right here. And they all know full well Steve would have hated this. Shame on them." So needless to say, he was not very happy with this announcement. And it seems that his sentiment was echoed by other people who used to work on Nickelodeon, like Rob Renzetti, the creator of My Life as a Teenage Robot, who both retweeted and also voiced his displeasure for the spin-off. Also, while talking about Paul Tibbitt, in case you don't know who he is, he effectively took control of SpongeBob after Stephen left him in charge when he left the show. And he was also a very close friend to Stephen and had worked in SpongeBob since day one. People began to notice this, and with the internet being the internet, they got really angry. So the show and the people who were working on it received backlash. We have Danny Giovanni, for example, a script coordinator on Camp Coral, who went from saying that Stephen was completely on board with the idea of the spin-off to say that he didn't know, likely stretching his words to avoid criticism, as one Instagram user pointed out. This led to Vincent Waller, who is the supervising producer on the most recent SpongeBob seasons and the producer on Camp Coral, to plead with people in Twitter to give the show a chance and not jump the gun about criticizing the show. Now, for the longest of times, I actually thought that it was just a bunch of BS and that they wanted to cover their ass in order to avoid more controversy. But then something happened. A project that I had waited for many years also suffered controversy before it came out. The project's name? The Last of Us Part 2. The internet effectively turned their backs before the game even came out. That's why my next video is going to be a review on the game. So that got me thinking. Maybe it's wrong to criticize a project before it comes out. So instead of criticizing a show that hasn't come out, I'm going to try my hardest to not voice my opinion as a longtime SpongeBob fan and instead stick to the facts. Because it would be very easy for me to just show you a picture like this one and say, "This looks terrible.
You're screwed. Thank you. Bye."
But that wouldn't get us anywhere, would it? There are so many channels that are built on hatred or attacking somebody on the internet, and they have achieved literally nothing. There are enough angry people on the internet, so let's try not falling onto that same category. First of all, we need to understand how the show came to be. Based on the timeline that we have managed to put together, Steven Hillenburg last visited the Nickelodeon headquarters in August of 2018. As his condition would then worsen, in October of 2018, Brian Robbins became the president of Nickelodeon, and after being shown what they were planning for SpongeBob Season 13, he began to give his own ideas. He said, quote, "Literally my second or third day here, I was asked to go to a SpongeBob Season 12 or 13 pickup meeting. I asked a lot of questions. What I realized is that we've made a lot of shows over many years, but the shows basically stayed the same. We had all these great characters in the world of SpongeBob, but we never individually explored their origin stories, or their histories, or put them in their own environments." I don't know what he means by that, but okay. So we decided to put a room together and really look at what the SpongeBob universe looks like. And out of that came the Camp Coral idea and actually a couple of other ideas. Camp Coral is the first show. It will be a limited summer series. I just saw amazing animation tests and conceptual art that blew us all away. It's basically about how Patrick and SpongeBob met in summer camp when they were kids. It's not SpongeBob Baby, so to speak, but it is in CGI, and they're younger and cuter. Sandy is really cute in this. She has braces, and it's really fun and it looks different, but still feels like SpongeBob. I couldn't be more excited about it. And here is when we encountered the first red flag with this spin-off. It came out solely because they wanted more money. Now, I know, right? Mind-blowing. A corporation that only cares about making money. Shocking, who could imagine such a thing? Okay, the reason is as to why this is a red flag is because usually corporations tend to at least masquerade this a little. In an ideal world, if somebody wants to make a show or a movie based out of an existing property, it should be that some writer or director comes up with an idea. He becomes, let's call him, a main creative force. This main creative force then shows it to someone in a position of power. Let's call him a main executive force, who would either approve or disapprove of the idea. If he or she approves the idea, then the project begins, and if lucky, it could even be a success. Now, the reason why Camp Coral seems to be made solely to make a profit is because this process is done completely backwards. The main creative force and the main executive force are the same person. It's kind of sad how the conception of this show was solely made because the CEO asked, how are we not making more money out of this? This leads me to my next red flag. Now, I already mentioned how Paul Tibbitt, who essentially started all of this controversy with his opinion, and as to what he thought was ulterior motives as to why the show was actually created, I think that what got people the most upset about was that he said Stephen would have hated this, which sparked a huge debate about whether or not Steven Hillenburg would have actually wanted this. On the one hand, we have Paul Tibbitt, who was a close friend with Stephen and had worked on SpongeBob since day one. In an interview with Longreads around the same time, he stated that Stephen used to tell him, quote, when you run out of ideas, you just do Muppet Babies. Steve would always say to me, you know, one of these days, they're going to want to make SpongeBob babies. That's when I'm out of here. This goes to show how adamant Stephen was against spin-offs. As I mentioned, one can't help but wonder why all of these spin-offs were announced after the death of Steven Hillenburg, and that the idea was so bad and so infuriating that someone like Paul Tibbitt would become so angry to tweet something like that, because Nickelodeon have been milking the show for over 20 years, but this spin-off was the last straw. It seems that this was too much, man. Now, because this sounds like a bad idea that got some former Nickelodeon employees angry, does this merit the backlash that people working on Camp Coral got?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
This is why I understand why Danny Giovanni would try to defend the show. It's obvious that it has talented people working on it, and they really don't deserve to be berated by the internet, because they are not at fault here. Which leads me to my next point. If you have seen The Simpsons, you might have seen the episode Hurricane Neddy, in which a hurricane hits Springfield but only destroys the Flanders house. After that, Marge decides to call the whole town to help rebuild the Flanders house. Comedy ensues as everyone in Springfield are incompetent, which causes Ned Flanders to lose his shit and roast everyone. Essentially, the Flanders house paradox is when no matter the goodwill or intentions people have, if they don't know what they are doing or don't have an actual passion for the project, it will fail. I imagine that the people who made the 8th season of Game of Thrones also had
Good intentions!
But that didn't exactly make it good now, did it? I was very hesitant about making this video because, like I said, I thought it would be unfair to berate a show that didn't have anything we could judge it on. But then, The Rise of SquarePants came out, and it gave us enough proof that they simply don't care. As I said in my Sponge on the Run review, they went against the main lore of the show, which tells me that they don't really care, and if they don't care, why should we? Now don't get me wrong, the idea of a spin-off, even one in the SpongeBob universe, is not a bad idea, it's not dead on arrival, but you can easily identify what is a good idea for a spin-off and what isn't by asking these simple questions. Number 1. Does it have a purpose and can it stand on its own? This is the main question you should ask yourself if you're planning to do a spin-off. Is this a story that someone is burning to tell? Or is this just a boardroom meeting of things that what can we do with this property in order to make money? You can clearly tell which one is which. Number 2. Does it focus on a character or characters that give us a new insight to the world of the show? Usually spin-off tends to be based off a character that was surprisingly popular enough that he got his own show. If that is the case, then can you put it in a new location that is different from what we've seen him do on the show? Can it add something new to this character? Can it expand the world? Can it show us that this character can work outside of an ensemble cast? Can it work on its own, or does it need that ensemble cast in order to work. Number 3, does it differ enough in its themes from the main show so that it's not a retread of what we've already seen? Especially this is important if you're making a new character. If this new character is going to show us a new part that we haven't seen in the show, then is it different enough in its themes, but also not different enough that it feels like a completely different universe altogether? It's a very careful balance you need to strike in order to make the spin-off work. And finally, does it have the original creators working on it, or at least an endorsement by it? Now this might feel like something that's not very important at the first glance, but after checking almost all of the spin-offs that have worked and those that haven't worked, almost all of the spin-offs that have worked have the main creators of the show also working on the spin-off. If you don't, or if you have some kind of people that are adamantly against the show that have worked on the original show for many years, that usually is not a very good sign. Sadly, out of all of these questions, Camp Coral doesn't really answer yes in any of them. This video is not meant to tell you to attack Vincent Waller or anyone that is working on Camp Coral, because this doesn't end with harassing people on social media, nor does this end with signing a petition, because even if by some miracle the show does get cancelled, it won't stop another Nickelodeon executive from trying to redo the idea in 5, 10 or 20 years. The only best thing one can simply do is not watch the show. That's the only language corporations understand. And if you still want to watch the show after all that I just told you, then that's just fine. You might have your own reasons. And I actually would like for this show to be good, but unfortunately all of the flags are pointing in the wrong direction. For everybody else that knows that this isn't the way it should be, know that Nickelodeon has a less than stellar track record with spin-offs, will pass. So now that you know why you shouldn't do it,
Don't do it.